It's the morning of June 7th, 1992, in Springfield, Missouri. The night before, the city's high schools had celebrated graduation, sending teenagers out into the warm summer night for parties and sleepovers. Among those celebrating were 19-year-old Suzie Streeter and her 18-year-old best friend, Stacy McCall. After a long night, the two girls decided to crash at Suzie's house, where she lived with her 47-year-old mother, Sherrill Levitt. But when friends stepped by the house on Delmar Street the following day, no one answered. All three of the women's cars were still parked in the driveway. Inside, everything was left exactly as it should be. The women's purses, their car keys, and cigarettes were sitting out. The girls' clothes from the night before were neatly folded, and the beds showed signs of being slept in. There were no overturned chairs and no signs of a struggle. The house appeared so normal that arriving friends felt comfortable enough to start cleaning up, unwittingly altering the space before anyone realized the women were actually gone. From the time the women vanished to the moment the police were finally called, a full 16 hours passed. During that gap, between 10 and 20 people walked in and out of the house. They sat on the furniture and used the bathroom. They even swept up a shattered porch light out front. Someone even accidentally erased a message from the answering machine. By the time detectives finally arrived, the house was a forensic blank slate. There were no suspect fingerprints, foreign DNA, or stray fibers. Without a footprint or a drop of blood, investigators had no physical anchors tying anyone to the empty rooms. When a location yields no clues, detectives lose their ability to eliminate bad leads. The suspect pool suddenly expands from a tight circle of known associates to include almost anyone who happened to be in the city that night. To navigate the lack of physical clues, investigators had to rely on possible motives. They began with a name already known to the family, Suzie's ex-boyfriend, Dustin Rikla. A few months prior to the disappearances, Rikla and his friends broke into a local mausoleum, stealing gold fillings from an unearthed skull. They were facing felony charges for the vandalism. Suzie and her mother, Sherrill, had recently spoken to the police about the break-in, providing statements that implicated the young men. But the case file shows a hole in this theory. Rikla and his accomplices cooperated with the police investigation into the grave robbing, and at sentencing, they only received probation. A triple homicide is an extreme escalation for a crime that carries a probation sentence. Yet because the Delmar Street house was scrubbed of forensic data, detectives could never prove Rikla wasn't there. Looking beyond the local social circle, investigators widened their lens to the rest of the Midwest. A year earlier, in 1991, 20-year-old Angela Hammond was abducted from a Missouri phone booth. During that kidnapping, Hammond's boyfriend rushed to the scene and passed a specific vehicle going the other way. It was a vintage green Ford pickup truck driven by an unidentified man. That description caught the attention of Springfield police after witnesses reported seeing a terrified young woman matching Suzie's description in a similar moss green van on the day the women vanished. This connection points to suspected serial killer Larry Hall. Hall frequently drove a utility van across the Midwest, abducting young women along his routes between Civil War reenactments. However, Hall was a calculated offender who usually targeted isolated single victims. Abducting 3 women at once and transporting them in broad daylight contradicts the methods of a predator who evaded capture for years. Without a fiber or tire track at the primary crime scene to link the two events, pattern recognition across state lines remains speculation. The focus naturally shifts back to local men with violent histories. Gerald Carnahan was a wealthy Springfield resident with a documented pattern of preying on young women in the area. Carnahan was later convicted of a separate murder from the 1980s. Detectives were finally able to catch him decades later by using a microscopic drop of DNA left at the crime scene. Then there is another local man, Robert Craig Cox. Cox was a convicted kidnapper and a suspect in a Florida murder who was living and working in Springfield at the time the women disappeared. In the years since, Cox has openly taunted reporters, claiming that the women are dead and that he knows the location of their bodies. Both men fit the profile of an opportunistic predator, but the swept-clean house provides prosecutors with no physical material to place them at the scene. Over the following decades, more than 5,000 tips flooded the police department, sending detectives on endless leads across the state. Acting on obscure rumors and claims of psychic visions, authorities launched massive physical searches. They tore up the floorboards of abandoned houses and excavated soil at rural farms, hoping to find any trace of the missing women. At one point, investigators even used ground-penetrating radar to scan the concrete foundation of a local hospital's parking garage. No remains were found. By 1997, with no leads and no suspects, the Streeter family went to court to legally declare Sherrill and Suzie dead. This declaration brought no emotional resolution. It was a cold administrative necessity to settle their financial estates and deal with creditors. Without forensic anchors to ground the investigation, the case has fragmented into decades of competing narratives. 3 women remain lost in a maze of theories that, 30 years later, remain impossible to prove.